Hello everyone and welcome to the 24th part of our regular Q&A format where we discuss all the shorter questions that you have asked, either via our Discord server or via YouTube comments or something like that. And today we have another set of questions that might be of interest to you. The first one goes as follows. A practitioner in question has terrible headaches or migraines when they try to practice boredom meditation or in any different other way. Is there an alternative way to practice in regards to the neutral feeling when you, for example, do not really have access to that due to severe bodily pains, as an example? Yeah. Do you want to start or should I start?
You want to start?
Sure, I can try. First of all, pain does make concentration and the practice overall very difficult. There's a reason why the Buddha has included medicine and requisites for the sick as part of the four requisites for monks and nuns, as I see it. So if you are in a state where you are in constant pain, then practice is usually a good bit harder. So this is one of the first things that I want to mention. Another thing is when there is a special mode of practice that leads to your headaches and migraines, when you, for example, try to practice non-activity, as we explained it here on the channel, then it might be a good idea to find another way of practice that is not as taxing on your body or on your mind. So maybe avoid the pain altogether. But if the pain really cannot be avoided, I would usually turn to some practice that is more based on faith overall, maybe based on inspiration in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, something along those lines, because the concentration that you attain through the neutral feeling is not that easy to get by under those circumstances as I see it. But maybe you have another perspective on that.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit hard to answer without knowing more details, specifically about is it only when you're practicing non-activity that you experience this, or do you experience it in general, like headaches and migraines? Also, to what level are you um already bound by sensuality and hindrances? Because I think it's the case for even if it's not physical migraines and so on. If someone is, very, very, very used to distraction and sensuality and that constant sort of treadmill of activity, and then they try to practice, non-activity, especially for a longer period of time, it's usually going to end up in some sort of extremely painful situation where the mind's just completely, utterly restless. So, normally, I would say to try and practice more gradually if you're someone who is um, quite bound by sensuality. Um, so instead of trying to go straight into practicing an activity 10 hours a day, just sitting in a room, um, you can start by practicing just for half an hour, make a bit of a routine out of it, because then you've always got that sense that okay, I'm not doing it forever. So even if it's quite painful for now, there is a way out at the end of it. And also start cutting down on sensuality gradually instead of thinking, okay, I need to just immediately um, start abandoning non-activity permanently. So, start getting rid of the worst habits first. So if you're, um, I don't know, if you've got a really bad overeating habit, for example, you could focus just on that and then, not focus too much on other things. So you can be like, okay, I'm gonna watch some YouTube in the evening because I'm used to that, but I will focus for now on not overeating and eating sweets and all that. Because watching YouTube is not like a sinful thing. Um, it's not like you're gonna be put into hell immediately for it. So you need to practice, be able to practice a bit gradually and have this long-term view. And I think if you practice gradually in that way, also replacing um, more unwholesome ways of sensuality with more wholesome ones. So instead of watching YouTube, instead of going to non-activity, maybe you can read some nice books instead, because that's way less stimulating. And then from there you can start going to non-activity. Um, I think the amount of unpleasantness that's going to invade your mind is going to be much less so than if you were to try and kind of force yourself in non-activity. So finding these ways to practice gradually, I think really helps a lot. But it's hard to give advice because it's very much dependent on how bound by sensuality you are, and how and your individual habits basically. Because the advice is different depending on it. Like I think I mentioned it in the server before, and it was a bit of like a jokey one almost. But like if someone is very used to like is so angry that they can't help but just throw a chair to the window every time they're angry, like we're not going to recommend that person to start abiding a non-activity for 10 hours a day, right? They need to like practice gradually. Like maybe instead of throwing out the window, they'll throw it within a room. And then instead of throwing it within the room, maybe they just pick it up and put it back down. And slowly, 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 the mind calms down. And there is no other way to do it, really. It has to be gradual. And yeah, I mean, thing is, even if it is gradual, maybe these things will still appear, like these physical symptoms, but you'll be way better equipped to handle them because your mind is not as restless and affected by unpleasant feeling as much. Yeah, do you have any points related to
that? Well, when it comes to the normal style of practice, I pretty much agree with everything you said. I have nothing to add, really. It has to be a very gradual approach. But I think the question is meant more on the level of actual pain. Like literally painful feeling, crippling, painful feelings, if I remember that correctly. And would you say that there is a good way to practice when you are actually in that, not so much in this, well, also in the sense of the 5 hindrances, but when you are actually have to battle with those sharp pains when you are trying to practice in certain ways? Would you say that there is a good way around that? But like that?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I feel like it's almost the same thing because, like, when you're battling with pain and so on, normally you have strategies to sort of distract yourself from them. So it's the same thing, the same principle of gradual training, right? But just slowly weaning off those sort of coping strategies. And then at some point, it will become easier to be able to just abide without any coping strategies and without trying to get rid of the pain, because that's basically how it is in the sutras. Like if you're in deep pain, there's nothing you can do by that point except enjoy it mindfully, basically. And the pain of that mindful endurance is going to be dependent on, before you got into the headache, how bound by sensuality you were. So if you're bound by sensuality, then you trying to enjoy it mindfully will be very, very painful. If you've weaned off those coping mechanisms, then the enjoyment mindfulness will become much easier. Especially if you've developed like jhana beforehand, then like even like as the Buddha did when he was going through extreme pain, he would just abide in a certain level of concentration, and that's how he would feel relief from it. But while you're within the pain, like it's going to be very hard to detach from it on that level. So I think same principle of gradually weaning off, right? I mean, what do you think?
I do not think that there is any other way. I think that physical pain overall is very deeply ingrained, and it's almost impossible not to have aversion towards that. At least when your mind is not very developed in the first place, when you already started. So if you lack that prior training, then you have no choice but to wean yourself off your distractions. And in that sense, I think that it is sometimes even harmful to let go of your copes too quickly. If you, for example, need to watch a TV show in the morning or in the evening to get out of bed because you're so sick or pain-ridden or something like that, by all means do that. It's much better to start the day like that and then have like a few good hours of practice instead of having an entire day that you have to spend in pain without getting anything done. Then you can try to gradually reduce even that once you feel ready. It's kind of about putting limits to your indulgement, even if it's subtle indulgement. At some point, it's time to let go of even that morning routine of watching a series. Really put limits on it, and when you are ready, then tighten the restraint, the limits even more, and allow yourself a bit less, but only as much as necessary to make progress, and not too much at once. It's best to introduce such things so gradual that the mind does not even notice. We also slide into sensuality the same way. We do not notice that we get very overweight in the first place. If we would notice it immediately, we would not do it. But it's sneaking in. And the other way around, we should do it the same way. We should sneak the restraint in so that it goes under the radar of the mind. That's how I would do it.
Yeah. There might be like after all the restraint, like you mentioned like faith-based practice, there may still be a level of a leap of faith basically into just being able to abide completely without any copes. Because at that point it may be like, okay, it's too painful. Like I need my coping strategy. But a leap of faith might be necessary there to start enjoying it mindfully. But I think, yeah, it's also a really good way once you start enjoying it mindful at that level, to start contemplating impermanence because it's right in front of you. And that's something that the Buddha recommended in some suttas where a certain monk, because he was ill, he couldn't attain any level of concentration. So the Buddha instead taught him to look at the impermanence and to gain the liberation that way. So a more so almost wisdom-orientated approach could be useful there.
Yeah. I would say that it is actually more difficult to attain a state of samadhi when you are in constant pain. I do not really see any way around that. So to capitalize a bit more on faith and wisdom as vehicles towards liberation might be actually the way to go, as I see it. But yeah, samadhi will come at the end, probably a bit later than for people who are not in constant pain, but it will arrive. But yeah, until then, it's probably good to focus on the serenity when you can have it. There will probably be moments without pain or with less pain, but during all the other occasions, it's probably better to focus on faith or faith in the practice. Keep doing it, capitalize on all the small successes that you made, grow your confidence, grow your faith, and focus on discernment more than you can focus on serenity.
Yep. And one more thing, probably I would say, is like in line with what I'm saying about faith and also gradual training, is to also think about this on a level of like months and years, basically, and not like a day or a week or like doing a week-long retreat and expecting anything. It's that purification needs to be very gradual, and in that sense, like you said before, like don't have any shame if you need to engage in co-ops for like a couple of months. You might be have to engage in your cope of watching TV every morning to be able to get out of bed. It's not sinful, like we mentioned before. So yeah, having that gradual, long-term approach also helps.
Mm-hmm. But it would be good to keep in mind that the general direction of training should still be one of renunciation. So the copes tend to get out of hand and get actually more over time, then there's probably something wrong. So it would be good to be mindful of that and always remember what the goal is, what the right direction is, and make sure to reassess continuously if you are still in line with that. And if not, make corrections.
Yeah.
But yeah. Do you have anything else to add, or was it a satisfying answer to that question?
I think it's the only thing I'll mention is that even if you're not experiencing terrible migraines and so on, it's relevant to everyone because you like in non-activity you are gonna have to work through pain, even if it's not physical, it'll be existential.
Which is even worse.
Yeah, it's even worse. And like the person who has pain, physical pain, has to do both, which makes it really hard for them. But this idea of having to make that leap into faith, into enduring mindfully pain, and then using that as a way to discern that higher escape while that pain is there, and while you're contemplating impermanence and letting go of attachments, it's relevant to everyone. So I think all of those things it's relevant to everyone basically.
Just it might be it might find better footing for a person who is actually experiencing the pain all the time.
Yep.
Anyway, I think that is a very good answer to that question. Let us move on to the next one. This question goes as follows. I am old now, but still want to practice the Dhamma. Is there still a chance for me? Many monasteries do not even accept people as young as 30, let alone 60 or older. Yes, this question is for you to first answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a chance, and as the sutta says, even if your practice was not to result in any superhuman distinction, and even if because of your restraint, you were completely in pain and just crying all the time, and it's completely painful. Um, as the Buddha says, that person will still be living the holy life and still be purifying their mind. So it literally does not matter what age you are, where you are, what you're doing. It's always useful to go in the direction of virtue, of generosity, of calm, of purification, of seeing impermanence. Um, it's just, yeah, it's harder when you're older because the habits have been accumulated for so long, that it becomes harder to undo them. And it's a strange thing, but because as you get weaker, the sort of craving gets weaker as well. And when the craving gets weaker, it's hard to discern it. So it's harder to see in that sense as well. You know how we talk about, when you practice non-activity for a while, the desire becomes apparent and the suffering becomes apparent. Yeah, like the craving has to be there to understand it. So when you become weaker as you get older, it can be a bit harder to discern. So yeah, I mean it's harder, but there's literally nothing else that's worth it, basically.
Yeah. I think in the sutras, the Buddha does praise young people, especially young people, for going forth from the house life into homelessness at an early age, because it's much easier to practice prayer when you are in the prime of your life. Let's put it like that. When you can still put forth the effort and the striving and push yourself to do the very hard practice. It's not an easy practice, that should be mentioned. But at any given time, as I've mentioned, it is possible. There are notable examples in the suttas where people is yeah, as burdened with age as like close to 120 years old. There are a few examples of such Brahmins still made a breakthrough to the Dhamma. It took them quite a while, and they have been practicing spiritually for quite a long time. I know one example, but you can still make it. And even in modern times, there are people or monastics who made a breakthrough to the Dhamma at an fairly advanced age. I think Ayakema, as an example, was 55 when she started practicing the Dhamma. And then she became a Theravada nun and practiced until, I don't know, close to 80 years of age. And during the latter half of that, she was pretty much in constant pain because she was having cancer. So that's not exactly an easy thing to do, but you can still do it, even if you are burdened with age, even if you are terribly sick all the time. So under all those circumstances, you can still put in the effort and liberate your mind further, purify your mind further. So I would very much encourage everyone, no matter how old they are, if you have only encountered the Dhamma when already kind of old, then you should still put in the effort. If you can put in the work, then you will get the results.
Yeah. It's the same principle, like if a young person should start practicing now before they get old, it's because you don't want the habits to accumulate. You don't want to wait too long in case like the death or old age, sickness, and all that appears and it starts becoming impossible to practice. But it's the same thing when you're old as well. Like you don't want to keep waiting because then you're just going to accumulate even more bad habits. Especially if you have any faith in rebirth and in the fifth contemplation the Buddha gave in terms of being the owner of your actions. Whether you're old, it doesn't matter. Like you're still the owner of your actions. If you still keep breaking the precepts, you still keep lying, both in this life and in the future life, you will still have to reap the consequences. So the best option to start purifying is always now. And even if it doesn't result in the supramundane discernment of stream entry and so on, like things as simple as purifying yourself from lying, stopping being a deceiver of the world, deceiving yourself, starting to put things right, it's going to give you a much more peaceful time as you age and get older because you're not burying yourself in the sun basically and trying to hide away from your reality. It's opening yourself up to accepting your actions and starting to change, which is, if you've lived a heedless life, I don't know how this person's lived. Like, it's always going to be painful to start making that shift. it's just better to do it sooner rather than later, because you're gonna have to do it at some point. And if you don't do it now, most likely it'll be even more harder in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just how it is.
It is. I think when you are older, there's a good chance that you have accumulated more sensual debt than a young person. A young person might be intoxicated with youth, with health, and all those other things, but an old person had a lot of time to grow those habits, to really strengthen those chains of habits. So they will have to pay back more debt than a younger person, very likely at least. So they will have a harder time. The initial phase of withdrawal will be more painful, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. You have to go through that. If you don't do it now, you have to go through it on the deathbed. And you don't want to have all that weight come crushing in on you at that one moment. You want to make it as gradual as possible and really let go of it so that the process can become enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Even if it's not, if it doesn't like result in immediate peace, like you say, because the habits are so strong, like things like not lying and also gradually practicing, like a long-term happiness will start to become apparent. And it's the idea of blamelessness,
Mhm.
cleanliness, purity, becoming a non-deceiver of both yourself and the world. And like even within the pain of restraint and so on, that more soul happiness will start to shine through. Um, and I think that soul happiness is the one that's gonna um, be the most satisfying, basically, especially as you come towards the end of life. Because it's basically you coming to terms with everything,
Mhm.
which is what impermanence kind of is.
Yeah.
Coming to terms with what existence is.
Yeah. I guess in summary, there's a reason why the 5 daily contemplations even include old age. Old age, sickness, and death. Because it is a hindrance. It is something that you will suffer from. There will be all kinds of ailments that you never knew you would get. Your senses will fail, your health will diminish. All those things will happen. And it's much better to let go of those things now than in the future. But if you have no choice, it's still better to do it now when you are old, as if when you are even older in the even further future. So use your chance because there's always, especially if you believe in rebirth, there's always a next moment, a next life where things can get even harder if you don't do the work now.
And you might not be a human for millennia, so yeah, like do the work now, basically.
Do it now, no matter the circumstances, and don't get discouraged. There are notable exceptions. People who could make the breakthrough to the Dhamma even when they were old. So it is possible. It all stands and falls with your own efforts. If you are old and still can put in the effort, then your chances are just as good as that of those of a young person. Let's put it like that. There are sufficiently many young people who cannot put forth effort nowadays, who are very lazy, who have basically no discipline and do not bring all those qualities that are necessary for good Dhamma practice. So in that sense, many older people nowadays probably have better chances than younger people sometimes. Yeah. You have to see for yourself. You know your capabilities well, but we don't really know them. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, or should we move on to the next question?
Um, let's move on, because I think every question we probably talk about it infinitely.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
Then
let's move on.
let's move on to the next one. And the question goes as follows, and I think it's kind of related to what we have finished on. Am I responsible for my booth? Am I responsible for all the good and bad things that happen to me? Well, I think, yeah, we have just now talked a bit about the 5 daily contemplations, and those kinda include the contemplation on being the heir of all the good and bad actions, and that you will pretty much reap what you have sown. Whatever actions you have done, you will pretty much reap the results of those in the future. While there is a distinction, there can be karma that will not ripen, and the Buddha mentioned that on average, you will experience the results of your actions, very likely in this life, and if not, likely in a future life, and if not, then you might be lucky and not experience them at all. But on average, you own those things. Those are the only things that you truly can call your own, your choices. So yeah, and in that sense, from the point of view of rebirth, you are also responsible for taking on the next birth. You are also responsible for the style and quality of that birth, because that will be in line with your craving. So if you have very strong craving and still managed to be born a human and not an animal, then you are responsible for that, because that will be a continuation for all the kind of choices and actions you have done before that, pretty much. So yeah, at least from my perspective, you are responsible for all of that. And it's a liberating kind of responsibility, because it also means that you can undo all of that. That you can also move it in a better direction, in a liberating direction, where you are no longer bound by your own actions. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's liberating especially because all the things that lead to like a future positive rebirth or even like more positive circumstance in this life are just mostly things about non-doing, right? It's about not breaking the five precepts and that sort of thing. Being generous is about letting go of your possessions and that sort of thing, not holding on to them. So it's not like this um, crazy thing where you have to become this ambitious workaholic and then be born in the right circumstances. All you need to do is just not break the precepts is the most immediate thing. And that automatically leads you into a more positive direction. Um, the second part of it, I was thinking about, am I responsible for all the good and bad things that happen to me? Certainly like the things you do in this life are going to change like what things happen in the next life. But ultimately, in terms of your responsibility for your practice right now, good and bad things happening to you don't really matter because ultimately, either one is impermanent. You will experience a good collection of both pleasant and unpleasant things. Um, so your responsibility in your practice is not to care about what good and bad things happen to you or what pleasant or unpleasant things happen to you. Your responsibility is your reaction and attitude in regards to them. So, in terms of the pleasant coming to you, your responsibility is not delighting in it, not wanting to proliferate it, not going after it. And in terms of the unpleasant things, it's about not pushing it away, not trying to have the attitude of, oh, I shouldn't be feeling unpleasant. Um, that's your responsibility, basically. And that's the responsibility that's going to lead to non-suffering. Um, any other attitude is just going to be basically you trying to manipulate your experience into being good. And if you're trying to manipulate your experience into being good, it's going to be rooted in that sense of craving, which means that from a long-term perspective, it's not going to do much for you because all good things don't last very long, basically.
Yeah. I guess it's important what you mentioned. It's actually about cravings. That is the thing that you are ultimately responsible for, craving. And everything that comes with craving. So you are responsible for your own suffering. You might not be responsible for the good and bad feelings that you experience, so to speak, but you are very responsible for the suffering, for the self, for the craving, and for all those things. So all the things that you, whenever you are pressured, you are very responsible for the reactions that you display toward that pressure. And that is very good to keep in mind. There are still things that just happen, like we often talk about thoughts just arising, actions just arising, speech just arising, and all those things. And yes, that is very much true. Those things just arise, but they can arise with or without craving. And without craving, they are of a neutral kind of karma, I would say. And with craving, they are either of, they are pretty much always of a bad kind of karma. So yeah, that is pretty much your responsibility. And that is what you should keep in mind. Anything else to add? I think we might have time for one additional question.
Yeah, I feel that's pretty much it. I mean, in terms of the first question, the only thing I would add is that, like, am I responsible for my birth? It means I'm responsible for you continuing the conditions of future births. But it doesn't mean that, like, there was no birth in the past at one point and then you, like, did something wrong and then you made yourself get born. The Buddha taught that samsara was beginningless. So
Mhm.
the original birth, yeah, it's not for us. But the fact that you're continuing the conditions for future birth, yes, that's within your responsibility. That's your responsibility that we talked about in terms of virtue, samadhi, wisdom in regards to the good and bad things that happen to you.
Yeah. Okay, exactly. I guess we can try to do one last question and see where it leads us. And it goes as follows. Should we really teach the Dhamma to criminals or bad people? Do they even deserve liberation? And I guess this question is for you.
Yes. I mean, I think the thrust of this question is almost assuming that the Dhamma is like an inherently selfish thing, and it is true that fundamentally we are concerned with our own suffering and ending it. But I mean, even before we get to the full-on liberation of transcendent dependent origination and so on, like the very first step is just ethical conduct. So, like anyone practicing Dhamma, it's always inherently a good thing. It's always going to lead to good actions that result in good consequences. It results in harmony among your community. So, yeah, them becoming better people, it's always good. And obviously, we get that in the suttas with Angulimala, who's like a serial killer who killed hundreds of people. And the Buddha taught him the Dhamma, and he became an arahant. And yeah, he became one of the noble ones, who was the most ethical, the most cleansed among the world, and that was a praiseworthy thing. No matter like what his past was, that person deserved to be emulated in that respect. So yeah, it's not something that's only selfish. It also helps everyone, and you'll be able to see that in your own practice as well. How much more positive relationships you can develop with people now that you're not fettered by craving and greed and jealousy and envy and ill will. Like yeah, it's just goodwill and compassion and equanimity and that sort of thing.
Yeah. You cannot really practice the Dhamma in a selfish way. And I think it's strange to think about it in a way that criminals do not deserve it. It's like saying that you yourself do not deserve to live in a better world where there are fewer criminals. It's a strange thing to say. It must come from a point of view of craving. Otherwise, such questions would not arise. I would say it's good if your enemies, so to speak, are living a nice life because they would cease being your enemies if they are happy people. So yeah, it's pretty much good for everyone. I don't think that I have much to add when it comes to that question. Maybe one more thing. In the past, we probably all have been in a place where we have been misbehaving in quite severe ways. We probably were criminals in the past, in past lives or something like that. I mean, many people probably have stolen as children if they did not have much or something like that. But you can rehabilitate yourself, so to speak. It's not too late, and if you really want to make the effort, it will be much more difficult if you have maneuvered yourself into a place of being a criminal, being a bad person. But I would not put the emphasis actually on being a person. I would put the emphasis on the actions that person is doing. Some person is doing something bad. It's a much healthier way of phrasing that, because that always implies that it can be changed. And that's not an inherent character trait, because you are pretty much the sum of your actions. It's not that the other way around.
Yeah. It's why the Buddha basically taught the human state as the best state to be in. It's because of its utter malleability, basically. It's incredible how much you can be in the pits of unwholesome action and its habits. And then through gradual changes, in a few years, you can be completely and utterly changed to an unrecognizable extent. And that's basically what we should be praising. Otherwise, we're basically, like you said, we're damning ourselves because everyone's been within wholesome mind states. Everyone's done bad actions. Like obviously, there's less and more, but the principle remains the same. Yeah.
We should actually praise people who attempt to make a change from a very bad state to a much better one.
Yep. That's what literally in the sutras they always said that like it's always when you admit your wrong action, it's a gain for someone in the noble discipline. That's what the Buddha always said.
No.
Yeah, it's always a good thing.
No. We very much should have criminals be better people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we are approaching the end of the recording window, so I think now is a very good time to stop. If you have any additional questions, any follow-ups or anything like that, feel free to ask down in the comments below. If you wish, you can always join the Dhamma Hub Discord server, where you have a community of other people you can also ask questions to, if Saif and I, for example, have no time right now. But apart from that, I think that's enough for today. I wish you all a pleasant remaining, I guess, Wednesday, when the video will be released, and maybe until next time. Goodbye.